Main event of the evening.
Hello and welcome to These Days Are Ours, a Happy Days podcast. I'm Peter.
And I'm Joe.
And today, we will be discussing the season finale of Season 6, Potsie Quits School.
Okay, Peter, tell us what happens in Potsie Quits School.
We open with Richie, Potsie, Ralph, and Chachi's band, with Jennifer also on stage with them for some reason, cutting short a performance at Arnold so that they can study for the next 2 hours, except for Chachi.
You're through playing? It's not even 4 o'clock.
Wow, I'm sorry. We got to cram for our final exams. That's just the way the burger burns out.
Joining Lori Beth, the college students plan out their study routine, though Potsie just wants to go to Inspiration Point with Jennifer instead of studying anatomy. Jennifer reminds him that he has to pass anatomy to be a psychologist, but Potsie, who is flunking that class, is starting to think that might just be a crazy idea. At the Cunningham house that night, as the family prepares for a dinner of Chinese takeout, Joni tells Richie about her somewhat disappointing report card.
Well, I got an A and a B and 3 C's.
You got an A?
Jim.
And Richie promises to help her break the news to their parents. Over dinner, Joni says she got an A, and Richie loudly congratulates her. Howard, who correctly guesses that said A was in Jim, is less enthused.
I don't want to hear what she got in Jim.
The doorbell rings, and in comes Ralph, Lori Beth, and Jennifer, there to pull an all-nighter of studying with Richie. Ralph tries to steal one of Howard's spare ribs, and is stopped.
Confucius say, man who study anatomy needs spare rib.
Howard Cunningham say, bug off.
The 4 college students go upstairs, with Richie certain that Potsie will show up eventually. Right as Howard asks Joni about her report card again, Potsie does indeed show up. He says he's too depressed to eat, though he steals one of Howard's spare ribs before he goes upstairs to join his classmates.
No thanks, Mr. C. I'm really too depressed to eat. Maybe one spare rib.
Howard checks the door to make sure no one else is there, then starts to ask Joni about her report card again. He is interrupted a 3rd time by Fonzie bursting in. His boots are destroyed.
The brakes on my bike broke. I had to stop with my bare feet.
He doesn't have an extra pair of boots. He lent the one he did have to the Hooper triplets, who like leather, and, Fonzie doesn't have an extra pair anymore. Marion recommends the boot-selling services of a man named Mr. Rudy.
I think I'm in trouble.
Once Fonzie has left for his apartment, Joni and Howard argue over her report card.
Well, maybe I don't want to go to college. You know, it's my own life.
Well, you better change your attitude, young lady, or your life is going to stay home for the weekend.
The day of the anatomy pre-exam, the class is waiting for the intimidating Professor Thomas to show up. He shows up before Potsie, who tries to sneak in without attracting Thomas's attention. He fails.
Mouth?
It wasn't me.
Weber, of course.
Yes, sir.
Thomas berates him for being late and noisy. The pre-exam begins. Thomas asks Richie where the right ventricle is located, and Richie answers correctly, below the right auricle. Next, Thomas asks Potsie where the aorta is situated. As Potsie struggles to remember, Thomas barks out more questions at him.
What is a ventricle?
Ventricle is on...
What is a capillary?
Washington.
Then yells at Potsie that he doesn't belong in this class, and Thomas is looking forward to failing him tomorrow. Potsie, humiliated, calls Thomas a rotten teacher. Richie tries to calm him down, saying he'll get kicked out of this class, but Potsie won't let that happen, because he's quitting school.
Yeah! That's what I'm gonna do! I quit school!
Afterwards, at Arnold's, Al asks the remaining college foursome if Potsie has come back yet, and gets a negative answer. Fonzie sticks his head in, calls for Richie, and has the redhead walk close to him on the way to his office so no one will notice the paper bags Fonzie is wearing on his feet. Unfortunately, a shocked Richie loudly blurts out that Fonzie is wearing paper bags on his feet.
That's right, I'm wearing paper sacks on my feet. Anybody want to say anything about it?
They do not. Fonzie tells Richie that if Mr. Rudy shows up, send him into his office, which Richie agrees to. Richie also tells him that Potsie quit school, and asks Fonzie to talk to him. Chachi drags Potsie in, having found him at the unemployment office.
Potsie, you cannot collect unemployment.
Why not? I'm unemployed.
Fonzie sends him into his office. An old man carrying several boxes and a stool enters. He introduces himself to Fonzie as Mr. Rudy.
I am Mr. Rudy. Boots for every occasion.
And Fonzie sends him into his office as well. Inside, as Mr. Rudy fits Fonzie for a pair of cowboy boots, Potsie explains the situation that led to him quitting school. The problem is that he can't remember any of the anatomy terminology, and what's more, the professor terrifies him. Then there's a montage of Fonzie trying on different boots. Furry boots, thigh-high boots, and boots with sparkly red ribbons. Fonzie asks Potsie why he can't learn anatomy when he otherwise does very well in school. Potsie admits he doesn't care about learning it, he just wants a decent grade. Fonzie says grades aren't cool.
Learning is cool.
Potsie has to learn to relate to the material. What's the easiest thing for Potsie to remember? Music.
Yeah, sure, I remember songs. What good's that gonna do me?
Potsie is going to sing his way through science. The next day, the entire class is nervous as they prepare for the exam. Ralph is furiously sharpening his pencil, and Richie turns down Lori Beth's offer of a good luck kiss so he can stay focused. Potsie is escorted into the classroom by Fonzie. He admits his stomach is in knots, and Fonzie gives him 2 fig Newtons.
One for now, one for later.
Professor Thomas arrives, and Fonzie tells him to take it easy on the class before leaving. The test begins. While everyone is furiously answering questions, Potsie is remarkably calm, bopping his head rhythmically and smiling at Fonzie when he pokes his head in through the door. When the test is over, Thomas remarks that Potsie finished quite early.
Did you find the test so easy?
Ah, yes, sir. No, sir. No, not easy, sir.
He declares to the class that he's going to let Potsie's test speak for itself after Potsie called him a bad teacher. But as he goes over the exam, he comes to the realization that Potsie answered every question correctly.
I got 100!
You got a 0!
He must have cheated. As Potsie protests that he studied all night, Fonzie strolls in and tells Thomas that his boy doesn't cheat. Thomas calls Potsie a disgrace to the entire university. Richie says it's Thomas who's a disgrace.
Bucko!
Potsie knows the material better than anyone in this class, and he didn't learn it from Thomas. As Fonzie says, the proof is in the pudding, and so Potsie, with Ralph on percussion with a pair of plastic bones from the class skeleton, Richie on harmonica, Jennifer on beaker, and Lori Beth on kazoo, performs Pump Your Blood, a song all about the anatomy of the heart. Thomas apologizes and gives Potsie an A, amended to an A+ when Fonzie leans threateningly on him. That night, Richie tells his parents about Potsie's A on the exam. Also, Richie passed too.
I got an A.
Give him a quarter, Howard.
He asks Howard if it isn't too harsh of him to not let Joni go to a dance on Saturday because of her report card. Howard says he isn't changing his mind, but when Joni comes downstairs, Howard tells her to have a nice time at the dance. She's been trying hard.
Keeping you home Saturday night isn't going to help your grades any.
Joni hands the papers she found in the attic to Marion, saying she won't need them after all. They're Howard's old report cards. Howard got a lot of C's, though he did get an A in gym.
Thank you, Peter. That was Potsie Quits School, which first aired back on May 15th, 1979. It was followed by a new Laverne and Shirley, in which Shirley starts dating a wealthy older man.
It's the very first time I've seen an orchestra made up entirely of midgets.
Shirley, they were full-grown men. They were sitting in the orchestra pit.
Happy Days ended the 1978-79 season as the number 3 show on television, following Laverne and Shirley and Mork and Mindy. NBC had another installment of Greatest Heroes of the Bible. This week's adventure was The Tower of Babel, featuring our very own Erin Moran as Tova.
You'll be the greatest master builder in all Shinar.
Alongside Vince Edwards, Richard Basehart, and even Ron Horshack Palillo from Welcome Back, Kotter.
He and some of the elders still cling to the ancient beliefs of Noah.
And CBS had a rerun of The Paper Chase, in which the study group wants to have a weekend party, only to have their plans ruined by a homework assignment from Professor Kingsfield. So, Peter, of those 3 choices, what are you watching?
I gotta go with Heroes of the Bible. I want to see what material they give Erin Moran to work with.
I have to go with The Tower of Babel as well, not just to see Erin Moran, although I am curious, but I'm perhaps even more curious to see how you work Horshack into a Bible story. Potsie Quits School was directed by Jerry Paris and was written by David Rio from a story by Jim Dunn. David Rio is a musician and writer who has put a lot of music on YouTube and other platforms.
The David Rio Band, I've Got My Ticket is the name of the song on 95.5 KLOS.
This is his only credited Happy Days script, though David says he was an apprentice writer for this entire season. He also wrote on such sitcoms as Blossom and The John Larroquette Show. This was also the first writing credit for Jim Dunn, also known as James Patrick Dunn, but he will continue as a writer and producer on Happy Days through season 9. Jim also wrote and produced on Joni Loves Chachi. Jim wrote the theme song for that show, and he previously wrote Do the Fonzie for Happy Days. He wrote songs for several of Gary Marshall's movies, including Exit to Eden, The Other Sister, and The Princess Diaries 2, plus some instrumental music for Gary's films Nothing in Common and The Lottery. He even plays a lounge pianist in Gary's smash hit film Pretty Woman. As for guest stars this week, let's start with Alan Rich as Professor Thomas.
Hi, everybody. I'm Alan Rich. I run a nonprofit company called We Care About Kids. And since you guys are kids, we care about you.
Alan was an actor from the Bronx who worked steadily in film and TV from the early 60s to the 2010s. On TV, you may have seen him on Kojak, Beretta, All in the Family, Incredible Hulk, Barney Miller, Hill Street Blues, Trapper John MD, The Golden Girls, The Nanny, Judging Amy, Curb Your Enthusiasm, and Two Broke Girls. His films include Serpico, Amistad, Quiz Show, Jack, Disclosure, and Highlander 2, The Quickening.
Highlander 2, The Quickening.
Alan died in August of 2020. So, Peter, what did you think of Alan Rich as Professor Thomas?
Professor Thomas really does seem like a pretty rotten teacher. I understand being frustrated with a student who seemingly didn't bother to learn the material, but Potsie is very clearly trying. Humiliating him in front of the class is not going to accomplish anything except for humiliating him in front of the class. I do find it kind of funny that apparently Potsie's song was so good that it caused Professor Thomas to have a change of heart and decide to give him an A. That's just the power of music. It can soften the heart of even the shittiest teacher.
Well, did you ever have a teacher or encounter a teacher like Professor Thomas?
Yes, but I was also basically a bit of an overachiever in grade school and high school, so I was not the one who was getting berated in front of the class. I was just the one who was silently watching and feeling kind of awkward as other kids got berated in front of the class.
I have definitely had teachers like that, and I've also been one of the awkward bystanders. And there are awkward bystanders in this episode. You can see the other students kind of not knowing how to react. I have a theory that this character of Professor Thomas is a deliberate parody of Professor Kingsfield on The Paper Chase.
Oh my God, that would be amazing.
That show and movie and book are about a young law student who has a very stern, demanding professor in law school.
Now that you're on your feet, Mr. Hart, maybe the class will be able to understand you.
And so I thought, oh, this is Happy Days' direct response to The Paper Chase. As a performance, I think this is also one of the showier guest parts that they can give to an actor. And I think Alan Rich really makes a meal of this performance.
Oh yeah, he is giving it 110%. This is a very engaging performance of a very unpleasant character.
We also have James Milholland as Mr. Rudy. Born in Peoria in 1915, James was a near constant presence in TV and film from the mid-50s to the late 70s. As it happened, this was his last credited role. Gary Marshall had previously used him multiple times on The Odd Couple, but if you watch classic TV, you've seen James on The Twilight Zone, Batman, Bewitched, Columbo, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, The Andy Griffith Show, Get Smart, The Dick Van Dyke Show, The Beverly Hillbillies, The Brady Bunch. He's in the pilot for that one, and much, much more. James's movies include The Ghost and Mr. Chicken, No Time for Sergeants.
When I say girls, I don't mean any specific girl. I just mean, well, girls in general, you know. Women. Sex.
Frankie and Johnny and Truck Turner. James died in 1993. Did you have any feelings about James Milholland as Mr. Rudy?
He is the excuse for there to be a fashion montage with Fonzie trying on boots, and for that, I am eternally grateful.
James Milholland specialized in playing snooty salesmen and desk clerks. He did that in so many movies and TV shows. Once you start spotting him in things, you'll never stop seeing him. It's kind of poignant that this was the last part that he ever played.
In the Brady Bunch pilot, did he play the hotel clerk who was mean to Mike and Carol when he found out that both of them had been previously married?
That's the guy.
Oh, yes, Mr. Brady. You have the honeymoon suite.
That was the kind of part that James specialized in.
He's considerably nicer in this episode. He very earnestly wants to sell Fonzie a pair of boots, even if the boots he's selling are not quite Fonzie's taste. Personally, I think he should have gotten the thigh-high ones.
Yeah, me too. I love those. We also have Delight Slotemaker de Bruin as Bunny Martell. Delight was an actress and dancer from Piedmont, California. She's also in the 1977 film The Day It Came to Earth.
Hello? No, we haven't forgotten. Guess we'll both be there. No, we haven't chickened out.
But even better, she was contestant on Match Game 75.
Now tell us about that name, Delight.
It's a Dutch name.
It is. You're married to a Dutchman.
No, I'm not married.
Oh, you're not married? Oh.
No.
Today she works for the Claremont Presbyterian Church in Claremont, California. Did you have any feelings about Delight Slotemaker de Bruin?
No, not really. She has a pretty thankless role as the girl that Ralph hits on before the pre-exam. I did like how politely but firmly she turned him down. That was pretty great.
I can imagine her maybe having a career. It's hard to tell from a part like this where she just basically says the same thing over and over again.
No, thank you. No, thank you. No, thank you.
She has a great name, though.
And Delight is a pretty name, too. Your parents must have been very happy when you came into this world. They were delighted, right?
I must have been.
Laurie Mahaffey makes her final appearance on Happy Days as Jennifer Jerome. She went on to appearances on Mork and Mindy, BJ and the Bear, Sheriff Lobo, and Romance Theater. She and Anson divorced in 1986. Do you have any final thoughts on Laurie Mahaffey or Jennifer Jerome?
I think this episode might have my favorite line reading from her. When Potsie says that he would rather go to Inspiration Point than study anatomy, she says,
Potsie, now how do you expect to learn anatomy at Inspiration Point?
She says it very straightforwardly. It's just a perfectly innocent, innocuous deliverance of a double entendre. And of course, everyone kind of looks at her to kind of hang a lampshade on the double entendre. Yeah, she performed that very, very well. I feel like Jennifer Jerome wasn't always the best written character, and Laurie Mahaffey didn't always get much in the way of strong material to work with. She didn't have a terribly well-defined personality outside of being Potsie's girlfriend, who also liked to sing. I feel like they could have done better by her, and if she had gotten more to do, she could have been a more engaging character.
I would agree. It's really hard to judge this character because they write Jennifer Jerome often in such a bland and boring way. Mainly she's there to sing extremely draggy romantic duets with Anson Williams, and I've always felt that these duets tend to just bring the show to a dead halt.
Yeah.
And some sources say that this episode was supposed to contain Anson and Laurie singing Bye Bye Love by the Everly Brothers, but I went through 2 versions of the episode and couldn't find it.
I mean, it would explain why she was on stage with the band at the beginning. I don't know if they actually filmed that scene and later cut it and people just misremembered it being in the episode.
That's the impression that I got, that maybe they did sing that at the beginning of the show, but then it just got cut down to the last few seconds.
Guys, what is this? Bye-bye. I mean...
As for the songs that actually are in the episode, I'm Walkin' by Fats Domino is cut from syndication, but it's in the original airing. It's used when Fonzie walks across Arnold's with the paper sacks on his feet.
And it is delightful.
Obviously, the song of the episode is Pump Your Blood, performed by Anson Williams. This was written by Jim Dunn, who also devised the story for this episode. What did you think of Pump Your Blood?
It's very catchy. It's very delightful. That being said, I do not remember the lyrics of the verses. I just remember the chorus. Pumps your blood.
That is the part I remember too. I think this is an example of a song with a really strong chorus and kind of forgettable verses. And I think one of the problems with the verses is that they do not rhyme. There is almost no effort made to rhyme any of the words.
The right atrium's where the process begins, where the CO2 blood enters the heart. Through the tricuspid valve to the right ventricle, the pulmonary artery and lungs.
You try finding a rhyme for aorta.
The people on Schoolhouse Rock, they were able to find rhymes for the darndest things you ever heard of. So they're able to rhyme all that stuff about the body and about history and grammar and all that kind of stuff. So if they can do it, Happy Days can do it.
In universe, this song was written by Potsie, and he is not terribly bright. Even though, according to this episode, he apparently does very well in school, aside from anatomy.
I thought it was an interesting character revelation for Potsie to learn that he is actually a good student. As for cultural and historical references this week, Chachi says that Al would have told Elvis Presley not to wiggle. Though tamed by today's standards, Elvis's gyrations were highly controversial in the 1950s. He gained the nickname Elvis the Pelvis and was notoriously filmed from the waist up during his January 6, 1957 appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show.
Singing a medley of some of the songs that you enjoyed to the extent of boosting them over the million mark. Here is Elvis. You ain't nothing but...
That was actually his 3rd appearance on that show. He'd previously toned down his act for the Steve Allen Show. If Potsie wants to become a psychologist, he'd better be in it for the long haul. He'll need a bachelor's degree, a master's, and a doctorate, plus a couple of years of training and licensing. That process could take anywhere from 8 to 12 years.
Yeah, well, I've been thinking about that psychology stuff, and maybe it's just a crazy idea, huh?
Ralph says that he would sell his own grandmother to the Huns. The Huns were nomadic people of the 4th, 5th, and 6th centuries who traveled from Central Asia across Eastern Europe and into Western Europe, raiding cities and conquering civilizations along the way. Their most famous leader was, of course, Attila the Hun. The reign of the Huns was relatively short-lived, and they left very little to remember them by, but they are frequently depicted as villains in the stories of Christian saints. Because of this, the Huns are associated with cruelty and barbarism.
And now, Attila the Bun.
Ralph says that a girl once gave him a compound fracture. This is a fracture accompanied by an open wound or a break in the skin. This term is most often used to describe situations in which a bone actually juts out from the skin due to injury.
I have so many questions about the revelation that Ralph once got a compound fracture from asking a girl out, because that's extremely serious. Was the girl just extremely violent, or what exactly did Ralph say to her?
The world may never know.
While my knowledge of anatomy is admittedly very limited, I do know that ventricle is spelled ventricle and not ventrical, the way Professor Thomas spells it in this episode.
He really is a rotten teacher.
Well, did you see his supposed diagram of the heart that he draws on the chalkboard? That's terrible.
No wonder Potsie wasn't learning anything from him. I doubt any of the students were learning anything from him.
No, I've had teachers like that where you basically just have to learn it on your own and you learn it in spite of the teacher.
Those classes are the worst.
Richie says the right ventricle is located beneath the right auricle. This is correct. It's also known as the right atrium. The right atrium receives blood from the vena cava. In Professor Thomas's defense, a lot of the questions he asks Potsie are pretty easy. The aorta is pretty hard to miss, Potsie. It's right at the top of the heart. It should be pretty easy to find on any diagram. A ventricle is either of the two hollow chambers of the heart. Capillaries are fine branching blood vessels. They exist to connect arterioles to venules. They can be found throughout the body, in the muscles, they're in the liver, they're in the kidneys. So Potsie should be expected to know this stuff. I guess the problem is that the professor is yelling these questions at him, which does not help. Professor Thomas at the end says that he feels like he's in the Ziegfeld Follies. These were a series of elaborate musical reviews staged on Broadway by impresario Flo Ziegfeld, who was inspired by the Folies Bergère in Paris. The Follies, which were famous for their beautiful chorus girls, lasted from 1907 to 1931, with revivals in 1936 and 37. There were also movies and a radio show.
Ziegfeld Follies marks the beginning of a startling new era in the world of entertainment. The Ziegfeld Follies is music and magic, laughter, romance, and America's most beautiful girls.
Have you experienced any media related to the Ziegfeld Follies?
I really like the Stephen Sondheim musical Follies, about basically a knockoff of the Ziegfeld Follies, decades after their show closed. And I also once watched a movie that was based on the Ziegfeld Follies and starred like a bunch of really famous people. And also I think it had Fred Astaire and Yellowface.
That sounds about right. I think if I've experienced the Ziegfeld Follies in any form, I think it's been through movies about the Follies. Other observations this week, Joni says she'll tell her parents about a report card sometime between the fried rice and her wedding reception. Happy Days famously ends with Joni's wedding reception. I'm going to give him some continuity points. I'm pretty sure that Fonzie sneaks a joke about leather fetishism into Happy Days.
Yeah, I got an extra pair of boots. I lent them to the Hooper triplets, and they like leather. You know, it's a long story.
What did you think?
That joke mystifies me, because what exactly did the Hooper triplets do to Fonzie's boots? That is definitely a joke about leather fetishism, but what exactly did they do to the boots to destroy them? Also, man, the Hooper triplets were into some weird stuff. First, the erotic Huey, Dewey, and Louie cosplay. Now this.
I'm going to think that this is another example of a joke going around the writer's room, like when they were trying to fit in jokes about Mother Kelp into every episode, or they're trying to fit the name Petra Lunga into as many shows as possible. I think the Hooper triplets became something that went around the Happy Days writer's room and like trying to think of weird things for the Hooper triplets to be doing because we never see them. And there's another example of good continuity in this episode. Potsie's love of Fig Newtons was previously established in Richie Gets Framed.
We're going to need a ladder.
Right.
Rope. Fig Newtons.
Fig Newtons?
Oh, yeah, perfect for a robbery. They don't make any noise when you eat them.
I'm now going to hold them to this. I want more Fig Newton jokes on Happy Days occasionally. So, Peter, were there any outstanding Happy Days fashions in this episode?
For me, it all comes down to Fonzie's boot montage.
Are you ready, Boots? Start walking.
And like I said, my favorite are the thigh-high boots that he has rolled up over his jeans for just a moment. They look really cool. Those should have become Fonzie's main boots. In the end, he instead chooses the boots with the sparkly red ribbons, which I do also like. Sadly, he will not be wearing them again in the future. I guess he took the ribbons off.
Did you have any other observations that you wanted to make about Potsie Quits School?
So when Fonzie is defending Potsie to Professor Thomas, he refers to Potsie as his boy twice. And it's kind of interesting since we know that Potsie does not have a good relationship with his father. So it's kind of nice that in this episode, Fonzie is maybe taking on a paternal role to this person who is only 3 years younger than him.
I thought that was one of the more interesting aspects of the episode as well. I think this is one of the better moments for Fonzie and Potsie. And I liked that Fonzie, who often joins in abusing Potsie, in this episode, Fonzie is actually moved to defend Potsie. And I hope that they follow up on that in future episodes, but I don't think that they will. I think in future episodes, Fonzie goes back to treating Potsie as badly as he ever did. So
yeah, but it's nice that they got along for this one episode.
So, Peter, I will ask that age-old, timeless question. Was this episode any good?
This episode is delightful. In fact, I might even go so far as to say it's one of the best episodes of season 6. I don't know if it's really fitting as a season finale, but there are some genuinely funny jokes in it. And I like the fact that this is an episode about how it's not that Potsie can't learn something, it's just that he has to learn it in a way that he can relate to. I think that's something that's really important because our conception of intelligence as a society is deeply flawed. It privileges people who can learn a certain way over others, and it tends to just be dismissive of anyone who requires different ways to learn. So yeah, I appreciate that about this episode as well. And Pumps Your Blood is a pretty great song, even if the verses don't rhyme.
This episode was very entertaining to me, and it tells a story that I think a lot of students can relate to. I think, unfortunately, there are teachers like Professor Thomas out there, and there are students like Potsie Weber who can't relate to a certain way of instruction and certainly don't respond to intimidation and threats and humiliation. I think this is something that Professor Thomas has probably used on other students in the past, and it's probably worked for him, or it makes him feel important or makes him feel powerful. And who cares if the students are learning anything? This episode I found very relatable, and it all builds up to a great musical number. I love the way this is all staged. I love when they push Professor Thomas around in the chair. I like this whole thing. If this doesn't make my top 5 list, it's only because I almost never put season finales in my top 5 list because they're just too new to me.
There might be some recency bias in there.
It hasn't been rattling around in my brain for weeks like some of the episodes on my list, which is a good enough reason to transition into the next part of the show.
Well, let's move away now and change the subject.
This is the time in the season when we exchange our list of the top 5 episodes for the season. I trust that you have your top 5 episodes of season 6.
I do.
And I will warn you in advance that with my list, I leaned very heavily on the goofy, over-the-top, gimmicky episodes of Happy Days.
So did I.
What is your number 5?
Number 5.
Number 5 is our season opening 3-parter, Westward Ho. It's just got a lot of stuff in it. It's got Fonzie riding a bull. It's got Richie saving Fonzie from a bull. It's got Richie and Fonzie saving Joni from a runaway wagon. It's got an evil landowner. It's got Al cooking a whole ox. It doesn't really have a lot to say, but it is very fun.
I would agree. And in fact, Westward Ho may turn up a little later on my list. My number 5 is one of the silliest episodes in Happy Days history, but it was so gimmicky and so weird and so memorable that I could not overlook it. And it's Fearless Mouth.
Was it because of the mad scientist?
It is because of the mad scientist, played by Leon Askin from Hogan's Heroes. It also gave us an alternate version of Ralph. This is what Ralph would be like if he did not live in fear all the time. This is what a brave mouth would be like. And of course, a brave mouth is even more insufferable than the regular mouth. Also, this is an episode in which a tornado goes through Milwaukee. So I had to go with this one just because it is such a busy and crazy and memorable episode. It's one that really stuck with me when other episodes just vanished from my memory.
Number 4. Number 4 is a very recent one, The Duel. This is I think it's just a really good episode, both for Fonzie and for Richie. And we've also got an extremely fun, delightfully mean turn from Patrick Gorman as a bitchy Frenchman. And there's a big climactic sword fight, and Henry Winkler swings on a gym rope.
What more could you ever ask from an episode than The Duel? This episode is action-packed, and it gets in, as you say, a very, very fun, stereotypical Frenchman character. My number 4 is another very gimmicky, weird episode of the show, The Magic Show. I was jazzed to have the Amazing Randy guest star on Happy Days, for one thing. And then the fact that the Amazing Randy enters the episode by hanging upside down outside his window, and then he's drunk for most of it. And then there's a part where Ralph, Potsie, and Richie are just wandering around his creepy hotel room, messing with all his magic stuff, which is something that I would love to do.
That seems like a great way to get cursed, though.
Absolutely, but it would be a fun way to get cursed. It's almost like the Sorcerer's Apprentice, you know?
Good point.
And then we get the milk can escape. And all through it, we get Clint Howard being the heckler out in the audience, just yelling stuff at the people on stage as they're trying to do a charity show for orphans.
Number 3. Number 3 is a goofy little domestic episode, Ralph versus Potsie. This is an episode where everyone is just making bad decisions constantly, and I really loved it. Fonzie gives bad advice, Richie gives bad advice, Ralph and Potsie take the bad advice, and it all spirals out into disaster. Also, I just really love the idea of Richie as a secret agony aunt.
That is a great Ralph and Potsie adventure, and it may turn up on my list as well. My number 3 episode can be interpreted as a Ralph and Potsie adventure, Fonzie's Funeral. This might be the most unrealistic Happy Days has ever been. It's also easily the most overstuffed with guest characters that the show has ever been or maybe ever will be. What can I say? This is a show where there are gangsters with names like the Candyman and Sticky. We have almost the entire cast of Laverne and Shirley showing up, and we have secret passages and walls that spin around like in Young Frankenstein. And I want to use this opportunity to correct an oversight that I made earlier. I often point out examples where Fonzie is written to be a Christ figure of Happy Days, and yet somehow I failed to point out a scene in which Fonzie pops up from a casket during a funeral, alive. This is maybe like the most Jesus rising from the tomb moment in the history of the show. So this is definitely an episode about death and resurrection.
And then there's an entire welcome back to life party for Fonzie, much like Easter for Jesus.
Number 2.
Number 2 is, somewhat unexpectedly, a very special episode about the dangers of smoking. Smoking ain't cool. What I really appreciate about this episode is that it's one that has a great deal of respect for Joni's agency. This is an episode where she can't do something just because the popular girls are making her do it, and she can't do something just because her parents are telling her to do it. She has to decide for herself, and I appreciate that. Plus, I really like it when the Cunninghams are a functional family who care about each other and don't want each other to get lung cancer.
Now I am kicking myself because when I made up my list of top 5 episodes from season 6, I just immediately gravitated towards the wildest, goofiest episodes, and I overlooked Smoking Ain't Cool, which is a great episode. It's a great Joni episode, and I like that she doesn't want to smoke just to please the other kids, but she doesn't want to not smoke just because her parents said so. She has to make the decision that's right for her. And I like that ultimately Howard has to back off and let Joni make this decision for herself. This is a much quieter story than much of what we see in season 6, but it is a great showcase for Erin Moran. And so I apologize to Smokin' Ain't Cool for forgetting you when I compiled my list. Shame on me. My number 2 episode is so silly. You already mentioned it. It's Westward Ho.
Of course.
It's hard to say whether this is Happy Days at its goofiest or whether Fonzie's Funeral is Happy Days at its goofiest. It's 2 very different brands of goofy.
Yes.
But this is the Western brand of goofiness. And I like that they took the cast out to a ranch owned by Paramount, and they filmed a lot of outdoor footage of the cast on horseback and riding around lakes and stuff. I think that footage looks great. I like seeing the characters out in the open air. It reminds me a little bit of seasons 1 and 2 when we got much more outdoor stuff and they weren't so set bound all the time. And this is another episode with a guest actor that I absolutely loved, Jason Evers, who is the evil ranch owner next door who's trying to take over.
He's straight out of an 80s movie about an evil businessman trying to destroy the community center or whatever, but transplanted into a Western setting.
He just hams it up so much in this that I couldn't help but love it. This whole story is really, really dumb, really unrealistic, but I was wildly entertained by it. I had a huge smile on my face the entire time I was watching it, so that's why it's my number 2. But Peter, what is your number 1 episode for season 6?
Number 1.
The number 1 episode is one that you have already mentioned. It's the one with the cackling candy-eating gangster. It's the one with the funeral parlor that's a front for a counterfeit ring that has a really confusing business model. It's the one where Ralph and Potsie get kidnapped. It's the one where the cast of Laverne and Shirley show up and get to do some really fun gags and physical comedy. Fonzie's Funeral. This is not an episode that really has anything to say, but my God, is it fun. It hits all the same pleasure centers that Scooby-Doo does for me.
You and I just realized in all our talking about Fonzie's Funeral in this episode, we ignore the fact that Fonzie's garage blows up with Fonzie in it. This episode is so crazy that that's a minor plot point. On most shows, that would be the craziest thing that they ever did, and yet this is just sort of a footnote in the story.
Something that I don't think we brought up in our episode on Fonzie's funeral is that while it does have the disguised in drag format, I think it's less, ha, this man is disguised as a woman, and more it's that Fonzie has faked his own death and now has to pretend to be his older relative. Some people might still find that not great, but it could have been worse.
Fonzie doesn't really commit to the character of Widow Fonzarelli at all.
He does not.
He is so much himself that he can't stop being himself for even 5 minutes to get through this stupid fake funeral.
There's something kind of admirable about that, but if you're going to fake your death, you got to not be yourself for a few minutes.
And Fonzie can't do it. My number one episode for season 6 is Happy Days' version of one of the most classic sitcom plots of all time. Let's divide the room in two, and you stay on your side, and I'll stay on my side. It's Ralph versus Potsie. To me, this is Happy Days in classic I Love Lucy mode. Obviously, dividing an apartment in two is not going to work at all because one half of the apartment has the bathroom and one has the exit outside. This is a stupid idea, but Ralph and Potsie are dumb enough and gullible enough to go along with this idea and try to make it work. It reminded me a lot of The Apartment, the episode where they got this apartment originally and they were fighting all the time over really dumb stuff. I liked The Apartment a lot, and so I liked having a second helping of The Apartment a lot. And they didn't need guest stars or anything like that. They just do it with their own cast, which I thought was kind of nice. So, Peter, at this point, I'm going to ask you for your overall thoughts on season 6.
When I went back over all of the episodes, I was surprised to find that there were probably more episodes that I liked than episodes that I disliked. But most of the episodes that I liked were ones that came with a lot of caveats. Overall, I think this season was really weird and tonally inconsistent. You kind of get the sense that the writers are throwing their hands up and going as broad and cartoonish as possible, which can be fun, but at the same time, it does sometimes leave you with nowhere else to go. Also, I think the worst episode of the season was Casanova Cunningham.
Casanova Cunningham is a tough one for me to get through, although Fonzie's blindness may give it a run for its money.
Oh, yeah.
When I was looking over season 6, I was asking myself, what is this show anymore? We literally go from Westward Ho to Fonzie's blindness. This is a season in which they do the first Thanksgiving with the cast all dressed as pilgrims, the evil eye with an exorcism.
And a witch who's not actually a witch, but is an old lady who goes around dressed in black with an eye patch.
We have the God Fonzer, in which Fonzie meets up with gangsters, and there's a gangster who has a metal claw hand that he can use to crush things. And yet we also get episodes like Kid Stuff, where we're supposed to be taking the drama of the story seriously.
Kid Stuff makes for a weird thematic contrast with Christmas Time, because Christmas Time ultimately has Fonzie realizing that his father leaving him was not his fault, and he can move on from that now. And Kid Stuff is all about how this kid needs to get over his father abandoning him and be a family with him again.
That was another episode where they lean very heavily on the pathos and on the drama. This is a season that is wildly all over the place. A lot of these plots have nothing to do with 50s or 60s nostalgia. They're just sort of crazy, cartoony, over-the-top stories. I found season 6 very, very entertaining. I was not bored by it, but I don't know where you go from here. They're trying every possible approach to storytelling that they can. It would be very difficult to summarize what is this show about? What is the hook? What drives this show? This is pretty much the end of Happy Days' reign as one of the biggest things in pop culture. That era is coming to an end.
Happy Days is generally thought of as a relic of the 1970s. Once the 80s start, it's going to get left behind.
This is really their last season as one of the biggest things on TV. And I can't say that they wasted it. They definitely were swinging for the fences here. I guess I am satisfied with season 6. It is a really crazy jumble of episodes with no clear through line. If you're starting with Westward Ho and you end with Potsie Quits School, you're obviously open to trying any kind of story. I guess the thing that I like about season 6 is that it is a grab bag.
Oh, yeah. And who knows? Maybe season 7 will be just as surprising.
Well, there are some pretty crazy episodes coming up in season 7. We'll just have to see how it plays out. In the meantime, Peter, how can people keep up with us and find out about all the wonderful things that we are doing?
Listeners can follow us on Twitter at Fonzie Podcast. They can follow me on Twitter at Peter Volfranc. That's PeterVulfranc.
And they can follow me on Twitter at Joe_A_Blevins. They can find this podcast online at thesedaysareurs.libsyn.com. And they can email us with questions, comments, and concerns at thesedaysareuspodcast@gmail.com. So, Peter, what do we have on the docket for next week?
Next week? Well, it's still going to be pretty crazy because Richie and Fonzie are going to be forced by a crazy old farmer into marrying his daughters in Shotgun Wedding.
Happy Days is not coming back down to earth anytime soon. So, see you later, alligator.
In a while, crocodile.
picture I'm in love with you.
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. I quit school.